So in this video, we are concluding chapter 22, taking a final look at India after they gained their independence from Great Britain. So we're starting in this video with the problems of the new government in India. And this isn't necessarily problems with the government, but problems that this government faced. One was unifying and consolidating the nation. Pakistan had broken off, Bangladesh had broken off from India, and so there were a series of maneuvers that prevented fragmentation from happening. In India, they elected Jawaharlal, I'm sure I butchered that, Nehru, as the prime minister, as their first prime minister, and he held that position until he died in 1964. And in Pakistan, which was almost entirely Islamic, they elected Jinnah, Jinnah, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, as the first governor general. And so they were separate, they had their own leaders, which sympathized with the plight of those countries, so that was good. Democracy and its challenges. India remained democratic after they gained independence, except for one small period of emergency rule from 1975 to 1977. By and large, India had rejected militant communism that had been spreading during the Cold War. There were some states that actually voluntarily elected communist governments. The first in the world, the state of Kerala in India, was the first to elect a communist government. Overall, though, Indians rejected communism. They were also a little bit skeptical of laissez-faire capitalism because they viewed it as materialistic. So they found the balance, somewhere in the middle. The Congress Party controlled the first 4 decades of independence, and the Congress Party was dominated by Nehru and his family, pretty much. In terms of gender issues, participation of women in society and government was rising during the 70s. And in fact, a woman was elected prime minister. Her name was Indira Gandhi, not related to Gandhi that we have previously talked about, but actually the daughter of Nehru, Indira Gandhi. She was a tough, determined leader. She actually split with the Congress and formed a socialist program called Down with Poverty. It was her that declared the era of emergency rule, where she jailed leaders of the opposing party. She curtailed freedom of speech, freedom of the press. She actually forced people to be sterilized because the population was getting too large. And Indira Gandhi was actually assassinated in 1984 by 2 Sikhs in her bodyguard. And just a side note, Sikhism is a monotheistic religion that was established in the Punjab region of India. And they just emphasize devotion to God and equality. There were some legal changes that included women's rights, but there weren't really rights for non-Hindus in India. In 1955, the Hindu Marriage Act was passed, and this raised the age of marriage to 15 for women and 18 for men. And the idea was to do away with women being married off at like 11 years old. And it also assured the right of divorce. Also, the Hindu Succession Act gave daughters equal rights with sons in inheriting their father's property. So this was a pretty big deal as well. There were some social changes that took place. Despite these laws and things like that, there is some data that suggests that there was still low respect for women. As sonograms became available for pregnant women, the abortions of female babies became really common. As they wanted to produce males to carry on the family line. There were economic changes that affected women's well-being as well. These were good, though. The Self-Employed Women's Association, this was basically a union that was formed to help women find and keep jobs. As labor was increasingly mechanized, meaning they were using heavy machinery, men gained an increasing amount of jobs in factories. And there were jobs that either women couldn't do or bosses felt that men could do them better. So the Self-Employed Women's Association was formed to help women find and keep their jobs. Economic and technological change after independence. So India experienced a green revolution, meaning a revolution in agriculture that spurred or increased farm production. There were new strains of wheat that made production faster. Rice prod grew as well. There was also a white revolution where dairy increased, and the sale of dairy increased because of refrigerated train cars. Refrigerated train cars allowed dairy products to travel across India in a way that the dairy could be shipped throughout India without the products going bad, because dairy products have to stay cold. So refrigerated train cars made that possible. There was also an increase in family planning and life expectancy. So better medicines, medical care, more hospitals, good sanitation in hospitals, that kind of thing, caused the general life expectancy to increase. And family planning also just meant that Indians were interested in having smaller families or fewer children. The idea was to take care of the few children they had rather than to try to expend all their resources having a bunch of children. Industrialization in India. New factories sprung up all across India, but it didn't really produce more jobs. And the reason for that was that there were new factories with lots of new machinery. So the factories produced more, but it didn't give more jobs, as Gandhi had actually predicted that it would, but in reality, it did not. And recently, India has been more focused on high-tech industries. So in terms of international relations, early on, India actually served as a role model for the newly independent nations. Decolonization across the world was pretty much complete in 1980. The major Western powers had pretty much by that point granted independence to their colonies. And so India was a role model for those newly free colonies or those new nations. There was still and continues to be the persistence of poverty. And India really is unable to take its role in the world, which they were focused on economic growth, but they're unable to be like a leading world power because of the persistence of poverty, even still. So just to kind of bring the chapter to a close, to make some more comparisons with China and India, some of the main ones are that Gandhi from India and Mao Zedong of China both mobilized rural areas. They used the people living in the countrysides, most of them were peasants, in order to add to their campaign and in order to gain followers. So both appealed to peasants living in rural or countryside kind of areas. One difference between them was that the Chinese communists rejected business. Remember, Mao came out against factory owners and business owners and things like that, whereas India welcomed capitalism. Bring on the large factories. Gandhi, again, predicted that that would bring jobs, which hasn't really been the case, but the Chinese communists rejected business. India welcomed businesses and capitalism. Another difference between China and India was that China lived out their revolutionary ideals and of communism, whereas India took a democratic path. Their leaders are elected by and large. They have the same freedoms that we do in America, generically speaking, but like freedom of the press, freedom to have a voice in government, freedom of speech, that kind of thing. And one last thing is that China and India both have pursued the benefits of technology. Even today, both are pursuing the benefits of technology. There's not an all-out rejection of technology as China had certainly done in the past. So this brings our Chapter 22 video notes to a close.